you see a lot of socialist ideas and all of that coming through people who are coming through university. Well-meaning ideas at the time. I mean, but to your point, they don't have that lived experience. And so, and then they get into, a capitalist environment where, the level of income that they earn is based on the value that they provide for the business, et cetera, et cetera. And then ultimately, then they want to provide for their family, and then they work really hard. And then there's a judgment call in terms of how much of that money that they're working really hard for gets shared across the community. And we know just through history that socialism has never delivered on its promise. And unfortunately, it never will deliver on its promise. And so what we're trying to do is sort of, whilst, that's political, gunpowder for the likes of the Greens and the left-leaning sort of, Labor side of politics, it's really important to understand that these unintended consequences that come off the back of that, like ultimately, if you're not growing the economy and if we're not getting investment into the economy, then effectively the economy shrinks. And that means there's only two ways to pay for all the things that socialists' idealism wants, which is, shelter, medicines, educations. Well, they've got to be paid somehow. So if you're not collecting or growing the pie and growing the amount of taxes that you're collecting, then ultimately you can only do it through higher taxes, or you can do it through higher debt levels. And both of those are very dangerous. And that's why when you do see these socialist experiments, eventually the government collapses in on itself, because the citizens and people just realize they're working for nothing. And also the country goes broke, and it's very hard to get out of those particular cycles, which again, if you want a great study on this, just study Argentina for the last 120 years, sort of going through that cycle. And that's the danger of popular politics and that populism that we're also starting to see come through in our political leaders, including, for that matter, the current Liberal leader in terms of Dutton. I don't like his politics. I don't like the divisive populism that he's doing. So he's not someone that I would respect in terms of being able to make that change. And so that's my apolitical view on that. I've said that, I'm a swinging voter, and so I'm not going to vote for Peter Dutton in the next election if he continues this divisive political position, because it doesn't serve anyone very well. And it's popular politics. What I want is someone who can run an economy, grow the economy, and continue to keep reinvesting, that sort of thing. And that's the economic benefit that Bryce was talking about in terms of how that flows through.
So what have we got in terms of economic benefits, Ben? So we've just talked about changing public perceptions, what that does. 2, influence on policy decisions, which is the politics. And 3, what are the economic benefits of changing the narrative? Well, if we can stabilise the rental market by offering more stock and more options, based on the fact that if we're considered the solution, not the problem, more people come into the market, that is the solution for the tenants that is going on now. And what's happening now is property investors are leaving the market, which is making it worse. Yeah. So number 1, we get to stabilise the rental market if we get back to status quo. 2, we've talked about this a little bit through the pod, Ben, but to a bullet point here, job creation, there is a multiplier effect. You said $1 creates 10. Well, that is true. One property investor is employing a property manager who might employ a Sparky, who might employ a maintenance person, who might employ a leasing consultant. There's just a ton of multiplier effect that comes through being property investors. So there is some economic benefits from small business owners. The benefits of being small business owners then helps grow the pie. And then thirdly, here is an entrepreneurial mindset, Ben. So we want to develop Australia's culture as thought leaders globally. We need to instill the entrepreneurial mindset. It's not for everyone, but the ideas come from the ambition that comes from being in a capitalistic society, Ben. So there are pros and cons of being a capitalist, but generally the highest living standards around the world are capitalist economies.
In terms of the government, this is about the narrow-mindedness of the government. If those tens of billions of dollars don't get invested, then who invests it? Because the political problem is not going to go away. So you're talking about over the last 3 decades, the amount of public and social housing that government has built has dropped dramatically to be less than 3% of the total property market. And so ultimately that is not just tens of billions, that would constitute, significant investment. Well, where does that money come from? It's only going to come from higher taxes or debt. And we know the problems with higher taxes and debt. It actually slows that economic flywheel. So it's really important that the government needs to be thinking about in terms of reversing that mindset And so that's the unintended consequences of trying to put out a political fire now, because this narrative around greedy mum and dad property investors or boomers enjoying the spoils of their life, and all the next generations having trouble coming through. That's not the mindset we want to create here. It's back to that winner's mindset, that aspirational mindset, that entrepreneurial spirit. That is, it's basically how this country has been built into the wealthy country that it is today. Yes, we've also had some luxuries of lots of, great minerals in the ground, which does a lot of that heavy lifting for us as well. So it's really important to understand that. And then off the back of that, if we've got this economic flywheel and economic engine growing, cities growing because they've got rental accommodation there, which means we can move that human capital, society wins, doesn't it, Bros?
It does, because it's a more stable housing market reduces homelessness and housing stress and healthier, more vibrant communities, right? But that entrepreneurial spirit drives innovation and economic growth, and so it makes our society more resilient and prepared to meet those future challenges. But ultimately, Ben, not have to rely on the government to provide them with a pension. The pension is not an aspiration, Ben. The pension is a safety net. If you're a trapeze artist,
well said.
If you're a trapeze artist in the circus, there is a safety net underneath, just in case the hours of practice that you've done, for whatever reason, you do the flip and the next person goes to grab you and they, for whatever reason, Ben, the timing is out and they slip. The safety net is there just to make sure that they don't break their neck. But they do not want to land in the safety net. That is the same way that we've got to see the pension. It is a safety net. It's not an aspiration. So therefore, the investor definitely wins. Society wins. But ultimately, Ben, if we go back to the original narrative that starts all this in the first place with all of the groups, the tenant actually wins, Ben. And that's the bit that we don't want to be lost, because if there's more choice and we promote better standards for property investors, that stability in the market for the people who want to be renters, for those who are in positions where they have to be renters. Hopefully we've shown you that the small business wants to look after their customer. So the investor wants to look after their customer, which is the tenant. So ultimately, Ben, if we get this narrative right and we change it from mum and dad investor to small business owner, ultimately the tenant does win.